Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover three topics. The first one is going to be the arrest of businessman Samvel Karapetyan and Archbishop Bagrat about an alleged coup plot. Then we're going to move on to cover the Prime Minister's visit to Turkey last week. And then we're going to close with the PM's controversial statements about Artsakh over the last few days. Businessman Samvel Karapetyan was arrested last week after he came out in support of the Armenian church and speaking against the current government. Let's listen to what he had to say.
What opinion should I have if a small group, forgetting Armenian history and the 1,000-year history of the Armenian church, has attacked the Armenian church and the Armenian people? Since I have always stood by the Armenian church and the Armenian people, I will have direct participation. If political figures do not succeed, then we too will participate in all of this in our own way.
Based on the last statement, he's being accused of usurpation of power, which in practical terms means coming to power in illegal ways. The police later confirmed that other individuals were detained in their operations, but provided no further details. In response to his statements, the Prime Minister made some inflammatory statements of his own, mostly on social media, in which he said, "Why are the whoremongering clergy and their whoremongering benefactors suddenly so active?" He went on to write, "No worries, we'll neutralize them again, this time permanently." This was all followed yesterday with a much larger number of arrests, many of them ARF party members and functionaries, and most importantly of Archbishop Galstanyan, who actually led the movement last year for the government to resign. They're all being accused of fomenting and organizing a violent coup. The state then released tape recordings of conversations that were taken, allegedly having the Archbishop talking about, carrying out a violent coup against the state and to bring about political change. Frankly, it's too early for us to have definitive understandings of what all of this means. But I can say if what is being said in the tape, and I've heard some of it, are actually true, it's actually quite incriminating. Now, what is this all likely to be about? It's primarily obviously about next year's elections, and precisely the role that Russia and the Russian state will play in those. It is well known that the Russian state is going to use all of her resources, and in fact financial resources, to actually defeat this current government. It is very likely that this government fears or believes that someone like Mr. Karapetyan, who is actually a very prominent businessman in Russia with very close ties to the Kremlin, would actually be a perfect fit as someone who can launder the monies necessary to carry out these operations. But the reality is, none of those things should mean anything in a democratic country. In this case, the state needs to make its case in a fair trial against Mr. Karapetyan, and the tapes are not enough. You need to actually have the goods on how all of these people are related, if they are related at all. What is suspicious to me is that his arrest came immediately after he made critical statements, and that's never a good sign. Frankly, all of us should be concerned about foreign interference in our elections, specifically Russian interference in these elections, because none of those, the intentions there are certainly not good. But at the same time, we should not become the Russian state in the sense that we have a process in which you can criminalize the opposition. Last week, the Prime Minister made a historic trip to Ankara to meet the Turkish dictator Erdogan. His trip came a day after Mr. Aliyev was in Ankara meeting with Mr. Erdogan. This was supposed to be originally a three-way summit meeting between the leaders of the three countries, but this was refused by the Azeri side, so they became two one-on-one meetings. Where did this trip come from? Most likely, it partly came out of American pressure because they want to involve Turkey in this supposed peace agreement. It's probably also that the Turkish leader himself wants to be central and sort of become a figure in the process of these negotiations back and forth. The fact that Mr. Erdogan was actually rejected by the Azeri president to have a three-way meeting is another confirmation that this peace agreement is never going to be signed, given the fact that they're supposedly brotherly nations. In analyzing this, there's a lot of criticism of the Prime Minister for making this trip, almost all of it misguided. I say this despite the fact that I'm sure that this meeting will actually lead to almost nothing. This goes both for signing of a peace agreement or opening of the borders. However, the reality is anything that creates any dissension or distance between these two regimes is a good thing. And even if it's a very small dissension or crack, you need to work on it to try to expand that over time. When you look at these two egomaniacal leaders, it is a myth to believe that their friendship will last forever. This is very common with authoritarian systems. History is full of cases of quote-unquote brotherly relations, whether it was the Soviet Union and China in the 60s and 70s, or Syria and Egypt, of countries that were, in one case, actually formed into one, in the case of Syria and Egypt, that turn out to be sworn enemies a few years later. Is this likely to happen here? Probably not, but it is something that we should be working on. And in fact, any government in Armenia that is not working on creating distance between these two regimes, it's not doing her job. Now let's move on to the controversial statements that the Prime Minister made about Artsakh and Armenia's independence. Let's listen.
Տեսեք, շատ են խոսում նրա մասին, որ մենք կորցրել ենք Լեռնային Ղարաբաղը։
Look, many people talk about how we lost Nagorno-Karabakh. I have naturally thought a lot about this issue as well, and here too my conclusion is the following. We did not lose Nagorno-Karabakh, we found the Republic of Armenia. This is the truth, because as I have said before, the Nagorno-Karabakh issue was used as a lung, as our opposition colleagues formulated it, so that the Republic of Armenia would not find itself, so that the Republic of Armenia would not establish itself as an independent and sovereign state. And the Republic of Armenia is being established, and regarding the future of the Republic of Armenia, I am more optimistic than ever. And I want to say again that this is not a story of failure, but of success. And this is one of my most important statements at this moment.
This is really not worth deciphering because, frankly, it's an insult to our intelligence. I can say that there's actually many people in his own government who actually don't agree with his views on this topic. You know, the only way to actually make sense of the Prime Minister's statement is by using historical or theological context. In this case, early Christians actually turned what was a disgrace, which was the crucifixion, into a victory by bringing out the resurrection or claiming the resurrection. The only difference is that early Christians celebrate the resurrection, and the Prime Minister wants us to celebrate the crucifixion. When it comes to Artsakh, Mr. Prime Minister, you'd be a poet if you didn't speak. Thank you for joining me this week's episode of Insights.
My brothers and sisters, we have to put a stop to this. And it will never be stopped until we stop it ourselves. They attacked the victim. And then the criminal who attacked the victim accuses the victim of attacking him. Yes, this is American justice. Yes, that's right. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy. Now, if I'm wrong, put me in jail.